Well, welcome into another episode of Story World. Steve here, your boy Al. What's up, man?
I'm excited about tonight's discussion, Steve.
Man,
That's how I am.
I am excited too. It's going to be a good one. We are talking about the parable of the talents tonight. The parable of the talents, one of the best parables in the Bible. Probably one of the longest. It's really long.
It is. I think it probably is the longest one that we covered. One of the first ones we did was kind of longer too, especially compared to our last one. I think our last one was 2 verses, maybe 3.
Yeah, I think it was
2
two verses.
And so this one is a lot longer. In fact, I guess just kind of diving into it a little bit. Not only is it a long parable, but it's kind of in the middle or towards the tail end of one of Jesus's long speeches. Actually, if you're looking at your Bible, if you follow along, or if you just want to take my word for it, that's fine too. If you go back to the previous chapter, it's just all Jesus answering the disciples' questions. They just simply ask them about the end times, I believe. And I think he goes on a string of close to 6 to 10 parables, just back to back to back. And so I don't know if he's getting it at this point or what, but Jesus continues on with another long one here with the talents.
Yeah, it's as if he didn't think he was confusing enough leading up to, in through all talking at the end time. So he threw in some parables to make sure we were real confused.
Yes, absolutely. Fortunately, us living in the year 2023, this is the end time, Steve. So we know that.
Yes. Yes, objectively. So yes, I have this book on my shelf, literally, that says, "Are we living in the end times?" And it probably says yes, and it was probably
says no.
It was written in like the 90s. So anyway, we're just kind of always in the end times. That's a good eschatology joke. So anyway, yeah, kind of crazy. So I think this is going to be a good one. This is an interesting parable. I'll be honest, I'm happy about this one because it's really not that hard to grasp. It's actually a fairly simple and easy parable to get a hold of, whereas some of them are a little bit more difficult. So this one is it is an interesting parable. It's definitely Dave Ramsey approved. It talks a lot about investing and all of that, although I don't know, there's some interesting stuff. So for the most part, easy to understand, but an interesting parable, and I'm excited to talk about it with you.
Yeah, I agree. I think kind of going hand in hand with it being simple to understand means it's very applicable. I think we all can kind of read it and understand, okay, here's how we can easily apply this to our life in several aspects that we'll discuss.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So instead of reading the whole thing, we have sort of like a short-ish description here. It's a little bit longer. Do you want to read it? Should I read it?
Yep, I'll go ahead and read it. It's a pretty quick one. So the parable tells the story of a master. Oh, it is in Matthew 25:14-30. If anyone wants to read it themselves. The parable tells the story of the master who entrusts his 3 servants with talents, a significant sum of money, while he goes away on a journey. To the first servant, he gives 5 talents, to the second, 2, and to the third, 1, each according to his ability. The first servant doubles his money by investing the 5 talents and gains 5 more. The second servant does likewise with his 2 talents, gaining 2 more. The third servant, fearing his master's wrath, hides his talent in the ground, returning only what was given to him. Upon the master's return, he rewards the first 2 servants for their initiative and faithfulness, inviting them to share in his joy. However, he condemns the third servant for his laziness and lack of initiative, taking the talent from him and giving it to the one who has 10 talents. The master concludes by saying, "For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away."
A side note, I'm pretty sure this is where "to whom much is given, much is required" comes from, and then from there, he who has great power comes with great responsibility. So I think we just connected the Bible to Spider-Man. You're welcome.
It's Spider-Man is a religious film.
Well, that's essentially episode of the Story World podcast, and probably the entire podcast. It's been a fun ride.
This all shadows.
Yeah, no, but it all it's interesting. It all comes back to one ancient book of wisdom, So anyway, all true statements. So a great parable. I did just look up and found out. Thank you, ChatGPT, for the little hat tip there. I did just find out that a parable would have been worth somewhere on the order today of several tens of thousands to
Yeah, talent.
potentially a talent. Did I
Yeah.
say a parable?
Yeah.
A
A ton of it.
parable is worth 1,000 words.
Words.
Anyway, I don't know. Yes.
Okay, a talent.
Anyway, a talent, because it was, again, a unit of money. Probably, let's see, yeah, like around 75 pounds potentially in the Hebrew understanding of a talent. And it would be the equivalent, or at least it might be the equivalent of about 15 to 20 years of wages for a laborer, or about 6,000 denarii, and a single denarius was usually the daily wage for a laborer. So that's really interesting. This was definitely a large sum of money that we're talking about here in the life of these people.
That is a lot. It's that'd be it kind of puts into perspective a little bit the servant who kind of got afraid and hid his talent. If you look at it just from the financial terms, this servant was obviously very like risk averse
Risk averse, yeah.
and really did not want to squander or lose it. It says for fear of his master, and so he ended up hiding it. It's interesting. The parable doesn't give an example of, say, someone that he gave 2 talents to, and then this person tried to make more money from it or more talents and then lost it all. I wonder what would have happened in that scenario where someone makes an attempt and then is unsuccessful with it. I wonder if that's insinuating that, granted, this is applicable too with like gifts that you have too, but financially, the gifts and natural talents that you have, I wonder if that's kind of alluding to that, like, no, whatever gifts, abilities you have, whatever like money you have, if you make that effort, then something will come of it. And it's almost like an embedded promise almost. I'm not probably just reading into it, but it's just weird. It's just kind of interesting that that's an excluded option, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think certainly, and especially if you read through the Proverbs, you sort of get this is the Bible is like really balanced on this point. Like very clearly there is it is good to invest. It is good to make more of what you have, right? It is good to be a disciple who makes more disciples. It is good to have 5 talent and gain 5 more with it. So it's definitely good to have at least some measure of risk, right? Some measure of putting yourself out there. But if I'm honest, I definitely agree, or not agree, but identify with the dude who put 1 talent in the ground. I mean, I can be very, very risk averse at times, and I think sometimes it'd be fair to say that has probably hindered aspects of my spiritual walk. It's probably hindered aspects financially for me, right? Where it's like maybe I should have made an investment that I decided not to because I was too nervous about it. And so, while certainly in some things I have taken those risks, there have been lots of times where I haven't.
Yeah, I think we've all been there, and through all different stages of life. Obviously, maybe to a larger extent. Well, not even, because it talks about the varying levels that people have. So one got 5 talents and the last one got 1 that hit it. So it doesn't matter the level of financial resources you have, or the limited, if you believe you have limited abilities that you have, that you can't do at least something with those resources that you've been given.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. So, yeah, I think that's interesting. And I one of the things about this parable that frankly has always kind of confused me, at least a little bit, was the fact that the English translation word here is talent, and we often mean it we can kind of literally say with the modern English word talent, like that's kind of what we mean. Is like a talent, like something to be used for the Lord, rather than just saying, oh, this is a unit of money. Right? There's kind of like more to it. So I always thought that was kind of an interesting connection.
It's one of those things too, where reading this, it's obviously talking about financially. Here, the example is dealing in units of money. And so even though we can apply it to other areas of our life, like the talent, how we understand it, our gifts, abilities, but it really kind of resetting your mind. It really is talking about a financial focus. Obviously, the application applied to other stuff, but a lot of times I feel like that we overlook it and go straight what you were saying, straight to the ability section versus first coming with it with the mindset of,
Yeah.
okay, here's the finances and money that I have, and what can I do to, better even increase my resources by this many fold, or, however smart decisions to do with your money.
Yeah, and that's another thing where it's like, again, people kind of treat the Bible as if it's some like, woo-woo ancient book of philosophy, written by whatever, the goat herders or whatever. But the reality is that there's a lot about just our daily life and daily experience that the parable speaks to, and that the Bible as a whole speaks to. And like it really is. This is one of the kind of those themes that I keep coming back to is like, it's a good idea to do what the Bible says almost always, even if you're not, even if
Yes.
you're not a Christian, right? Even if you don't believe the spiritual teachings, um, it it's like it's a really good idea just to like to do life, to do business, um, the Bible's way. All right, so yeah, I there's another aspect of this parable that I want to kind of go to that I think is kind of interesting because one of the things that we do a lot is compare ourselves to other people. I
Mm.
actually recorded a podcast about this for one of my shows, and because it's one of the most deadly things, and there's even like a trap in comparing yourself to who you wanna be in the future. Like, there's a great book called The Gap in the Gain, by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy, and it talks about this idea that, like, the people who end up being the highest achievers are focused on the gain, like, how much better they are today than they were 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 1 year ago or even yesterday. Whereas people who just never quite seem to get traction are those who are just always focused on what they want and they're never content. Like, they're never able to act or live out of contentment, and that's a trap that we could fall into. So comparing yourself to, an unreasonable expectation of yourself and or comparing yourself to others. And I think that makes it really interesting in both the financial, frankly, and the sort of diligence areas. That it specifically says that each one was given according to his ability, and so the expectations that were in place by the master was according to their ability to be able to to be able to accomplish the task. And so what that suggests is that the person who squandered the opportunity had the ability like it was within his power to make good on this. And so he lost an opportunity that was well within his grasp to be able to do because of that fear of that risk or just whatever you want to think about. So I think that's really, really interesting that sometimes we talk ourselves out of doing something that we have been given all power and authority and ability to do. And that's a shame.
Yeah, it's not looking at, if you will, because a story term, it's not looking at the payoff at the end of it. You're looking instead on the temporal and, like we used to, in comparison. So if you look at what the parable says, the master representation of Jesus, it has the same exact response to both servants. He said, "You will be master of many things. Come and
Mhm.
share my joy," or whatever it is. But it's literally the same exact response for both. He doesn't say to the one, "Wow, like you're gonna, be like a king in my courts," or whatever. The other one, "Oh wow, nice. You get to, like view in and, have a nice, little place
Yeah.
to flavor." And, it's not two totally different things. It's the same thing. Now, obviously there might be some specificities that kind of, that come to fruition with it. But overall, they're both
Yeah.
rewarded, they're both loved, and they're both praised for what they've done with the talents that they have.
Correct, yeah, like, the 2 talent guy was not expected to go out and gain 5,
Yeah.
right? And not diminished because, he didn't do so. It was like he like and if you think about it, what they both did was double their money, right? They both they both doubled their money. So, like, in one sense, they accomplished the same thing even though the amounts were different. And this leads to, like, another I don't think it's a parable. It's not a parable. It's in the context of an event that actually happened, but, there's a story in the Bible that we refer to as, like, the widow's 2 mites or whatever, where he was, like, standing around with this group of Pharisees and talking to them, and everybody was going and putting their offerings in the collection plate, and this widow who had nothing, you know, comes up and, like, the 2 little pieces of whatever she did have, she put in, and Jesus's remark was that was that she gave more than anybody because basically she gave out of her sacrifice. She gave out of she gave everything that she had, whereas everybody else gave just a little bit of what they had. And so, definitely an interesting story that it's not about who gives the most, who does the most, who produces the most. It's really about faithfulness and about um, doing about what risks you take, about what sacrifices you make, and about how responsible you are with those things that you have been given to do and tasked to do and that you are able to do. So
Yeah.
it's a great story.
Yeah, we can't be worrying about the things we can't do because we don't have the resources to do it. Like from
Yeah.
a financial perspective, you hear that someone in your church or whoever donated a car to a family in need. Like that's
Mhm.
fantastic. And
Yep.
you might be down on yourself thinking, wow, I just cannot give to that level because I don't have the resources for that. And you
Right.
can kind of get discouraged by seeing other people do great things like that when we can just be looking at, well, what can I do? And that's really the only
Mhm.
thing that does matter.
Yeah, and see, like, that there's this whole thing with that where you don't even get in the game, right? Like, you sit on the bench, you sit on the sideline, so it's like you're envious because you couldn't gift that family the car, but it's like, did you even put $50 in the offering plate? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, did you even do that? And so it's like, does it really all or nothing? Is it a car? Well, what's so special about cars? Why not buildings or houses or businesses or whatever? Like, why like again, it's all arbitrary, and so when we don't and I think the point, and this point is made in various ways and various times throughout the Bible, but, um, the point is that when God sees you being faithful in the things that you do have, again, that is the exact point of this story. When he sees you being faithful in what you do have, then he gives you the opportunity to again demonstrate that you can be faithful once you have more. And that is true across finance, actual talents, abilities, skills, etc.
It can really affect us too in the talents and abilities section where, especially just with how people, and it's kind of natural, but just how like people are praised with what they do in their respective field. So I'll give an example for both
Mm.
you and I. I know it's not your core focus, but it is a focus of yours, Steve. You have your YouTube channel, The Whimsical Creationist. You could look at something like Answers in Genesis and think, well, I could never build, for lack of a better term, like empire or business that big. So why would I even try to get into that field? It doesn't really matter in the end, and then just not do it. But that's not really going full speed with the abilities and talents and resources that you have been given and the drive that you've been given. Same token on my side, I could look at Brandon Sanderson and say, well, gee, I'm never gonna like be as famous as him in writing. Like, I don't really get what the point is. He has, all these people that follow him. I don't really understand, why I would even like try to like put forth that much effort where
Yeah.
I never will get up to that level, but why can't I get to the level that I'm capable of? And
Sure.
so, and it's like that with everything. I think that we get really discouraged sometimes. And that's when we have to this goes to another subject, but have to turn from a consumer mindset to a creator mindset and just doing what.
Yeah. That's right. Well, it's one step in front of the other. I mean, who says that you couldn't be greater one day? Like, let me
That's
give
true.
you let me give you um a really good example. I'm glad you brought up the thing about my podcast because it's actually like something I needed to, on a personal level, tell you about anyway. That's kind of
Yeah,
cool.
go for
And
it.
so I might as well just this is story world, right? I'm allowed to share a story for a minute.
Yes.
So just really, really cool, and it's a perfect illustration of this parable, I think. So I recently went to the International Conference on Creationism, which is basically just a research conference for nerds who are interested in exploring science from a biblical worldview. And Alex mentioned a group that out of Kentucky called Answers in Genesis. They are the behemoth in this space. They are a large nonprofit that has what I understand to probably be some for-profit subsidiaries under them. They have theme parks, attractions. Like they're literally in the ultimate irony.
They have an Australian.
They they do have an Australian, and they are literally building a Tower of Babel right now. Now, if that's not the most ironic thing I've ever heard in my life, that they are building a Tower of Babel, but they are.
As long as
So
they don't go too high.
as long as they don't go too high, amen. Bless God. And
Yeah.
so, what is interesting? What is interesting is, and I want to be careful with, too much defamation or anything here. But suffice it to say, I happen to know that they make a lot of money per year. They bring in from donors and everything. Like and it takes a lot of money for their operation to run. They bring in a lot of money per year, and I just happen to know for a concrete fact that they contribute very little of that money to actual creation research. Right. So, like, again, this whole field relies on research funding. To be able to, like, get the scientific data to even, like, be able to have theme parks and attractions and amusements where, like, you're trying to educate people on science from a biblical worldview. You can't do that without the research. And so they have a couple researchers on their staff, but that's about it. They don't really contribute to creationist research outside of that. So, I'm at this conference and I have this thought, well, I'm not a scholar, I'm not a theologian, I'm not a scientist, I'm not gonna be. And so, but I know how to build a website, and I'm a business guy, and I know how to think bigger than my wallet and my current abilities. And so that's kind of interesting. Well, over the years, here, just, it's been since 2017 that I started doing this. I have made some connections with people over that time to where I am at least known, like if they don't know me personally, they've seen my stuff or whatever, among, some of the most important people in that whole space, in that movement, people who are moving and shaking and able to get things done. So I can't say the name of the group or anybody involved, but I had a meeting 2 days ago. It was a 2-hour long meeting with some very important big players in that space. And it looks like we're going to potentially get to work together on a project to create a crowdfunding website, think Kickstarter / GoFundMe, for creation research to actually take on the giant, if you will, not to, like, head to head compete. It's not about that, but to say, like, okay, look, when you give your money there, I'm not saying you shouldn't give your money there, but you might not actually be funding what you think you're funding. Whereas here, like, you can see very transparently where your money is going, etc. And so the irony is that even though I'm a nobody, I literally have 149. I'm trying to get to 150, right? I have 149 YouTube subscribers, right?
I'll create an account after this, so you don't worry.
Oh, thank you. Please do. Right. So it's not that I'm like, some big person in this space, but, like, I've done the work. I've been behind the scenes. I've made the connections. I'm literally just doing what I know how to do. Within my abilities, I know how to put together a website. I know how to structure, deals for that kind of thing because of my business background. And it's something that it looks like, Lord willing, I'm going to get to do. And how cool is that? Again, so I may not be Answers in Genesis, but, like, I am now in this position where I'm going to get to make a very significant impact, even if somewhat indirectly. That's totally fine. Like, I'll be behind the scenes a little more. Totally fine. But, be implementing this system and ultimately have had the idea for this system that will make a major impact in that space, Lord willing. And so that's just a perfect example of how, like, the only thing that you can do is do what you can do with what you know how to do and with what you have been given, and then watch God turn that into whatever he wants to. And if that becomes bigger than Answers in Genesis one day, which I hope it does, fantastic. If it doesn't, fine. It's not going to be judged by how big it was or how whatever relevant it was to Answers in Genesis. It's going to be judged by what we did. And were we faithful with the resources that we had? And I think the answer to that is yes. And so I think the sky's the limit on where it could go. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think it illustrates this exactly.
When you open up, before you open up crowdfunding, let me know if you're looking for an angel investor, because I really want to make some big buckaroos off of this thing, Steve.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Big buckaroos. I don't know. There are no, other than that one organization, I don't know, but there are big buckaroos in creationism. But yeah, that's crazy.
Perfect. All right, Steve, that's all the thoughts I have. I don't know about you.
Cool. Yeah. Let's, shall we move on to stories of the week?
Let's do it.
We need, like, a bumper for this, but, some sort of, like, some flashies. And anyway,
I think that was perfect enough. You can just do that.
Awesome.
All right. So my story of the week, I just watched a documentary. I think it's been on Netflix for a little bit. Tour de France Unchained. Um,
Mm.
I've always liked watching the tour. I really got like super into the technicalities of it or like really looking into the cycling at all. But I forget the name of the company that does it. It's on Netflix. I forget the name of the company that made the documentary, but it is fantastic. Um, does a just a great job of building up the races, showing the individual effort of the cyclists, how it all works. Just an amazing documentary, and I think that they're coming out. They're making one from this past year too, the Tour de France. So I think they're planning on coming out every year. I think it's the same company too. They made. I just started watching it. I could be confused. Maybe it's a different company, but it seems like a similar setup. They made a
Mm.
F1 documentary on Netflix, and that has
Mm.
5 seasons. That started like 5 or 6 years ago, and so yeah, I just really highly recommend it. It's really good.
Awesome. Cool. So, mine is my story of the week is Shut Up and Listen. So it is a business book written by a guy named Tillman Fertitta. And Tillman is out of Houston, Texas. He owns the Houston Rockets. He owns Landry's, Rainforest Cafe, the Golden Nugget, like a bunch of different casinos and restaurant chains. He is on like the Forbes 400 list, like the 135th richest person in America or something like that. And he is like this super down home, like country boy Texas billionaire who's just really smart with the basics, right? And so he wrote this book called Shut Up and Listen. I didn't know what to expect. It was actually really, really good. In that, like in the way where you literally feel like you're sitting in a parlor with your ultra rich uncle. And he's like, forget about all this stuff. He's like, just do this, right? Like I'll just share one thing, right? Like one of his big concepts is like the 95-5 rule, he calls it. And he's like, the success or failure of most businesses isn't in the 95%, right? So I have a web design business, right? Okay, like the success and failure of my business is probably not in the web design, right? Because like you're not going to be in business at all as a web designer if you don't have some credentials. Like, you know what I mean? Like we might not have the best web team ever, although I'm pretty partial. I think we do a great job. But like we're probably not going to fail there. Like even if we weren't as good as we were, we're probably not going to fail there. And I know that's true because before we had a team, it was just me and I'm not the greatest designer and we weren't failing. Right? So it's not in that. It's in the 5%, not the 95%. It's in the 5%. It's in the how fast are you answering the phone? What's your customer experience like? Do you pay attention to the small details? Do you admit when stuff gets messed up? You know what I mean? It's that 5% of stuff that separates most businesses, right? And that's just one example. There's a bunch of, he calls them Tillmanisms in there. And there's just a bunch of these like practical down to earth things that are just like, most people are worried about the flashy whiz bang stuff, where what you need to be worried about is these basic fundamentals, like knowing your numbers, like not telling customers no. He's like, make a scrambled egg. It's like, don't tell them that your breakfast kitchen closed 5 minutes ago. They know that's a lie. Throw the egg in the pan, charge them $5 extra, and whatever. At least then they're happy. Like, you know what I mean? Like he says there are no spare customers, right? You can't afford to lose a customer. You just can't. And just all that stuff that it's like you really need to be reminded of. And it's just so nice coming from a guy who feels like your old rich uncle. A cool little bonus addendum to that is he is the third cousin of Lorenzo Fertitta, who was the CEO of the UFC, who actually, like, he and his brother, Lorenzo and his brother, I forget his brother's name, bought the UFC for like $2 million or something crazy.
Oh my
Right?
gosh.
I know. Can you imagine that? Bought it for like $2 million, gave Dana White 10% and made him the president, right? And then spent $48 million making the company into something, and then finally it took off. And then like when they sold the company, I think they sold it for $4 or $5 billion or something like that. And then there was just another deal done with the UFC and the parent company with the WWE to bring those together, and that was a $20 billion deal, $21 billion deal. So, anyway, that was kind of a cool little nugget that they were sort of related, but I just appreciated how like, and it just seems to be that way. I know my stories of the week are always so long. I'm sorry. It just always seems to be that like the most successful people are the ones who are thinking on like the foundational principle stuff, right? It's not the most successful people who like come out with a new marketing strategy each and every week. They're like, what do my numbers look like? How do I get the right people in this job? And like, what's the next thing? Like one of his things he says is change, 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 right? So it's like, what's the next thing? Are you going to stay stuck in a rut? Or are you going to move to the next thing? Like it's the people who are thinking about that who are ultimately successful. So shut up and listen. I highly recommend it. It was a great, great read. Even though it's written in a very like humble, like he's not an author and you can tell it. And I love that. It's like, it just sounds like your old rich uncle teaching you how to life. So very good book. Shut up and listen. Worth a read for anybody who's in a management position or leading a business, very good stuff.
It's worthwhile to have an old rich uncle, especially if you're in the will. So
that's true. That's true.
That's my
I don't have one of those, depending on your definition of rich. Definitely not that rich. So anyway.
All right, Steve.
All right. All right. Well,
I'll see you next time.
See you next time. Share the podcast, like it, heart it, hide your kids, hide your wife, all that. God bless.